Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is Glen, who is an advisor to the Ukrainian defense minister. He is also an expert on transformations of companies and countries. And we'll talk about what that actually means in practice in a few moments. But before we get into that, please tell us a little about yourself, how you ended up in Riga and also helping Ukraine with its defense transformation and issues. And how does this field work?
Okay, well, first bit, I must admit, to be accurate, I'm not now helping the Ukrainian defense minister, but I have done. In fact, I was the first foreign advisor invited into the Ministry of Defense in 2014 when the war started, and I actually went in there and sat in next to the minister's office and worked with a team then. How did I get here? It's quite interesting. I had a long army career, 37 years as an army officer. Ended up as a lieutenant colonel, and during most of that time, I was also an international athlete, and I ran for Great Britain and Wales, and I ran in major championships. I was also in the national team with orienteering and quite a good cross country skier. Now, why does this count? Well, it meant I was away a lot. And one of the things about being away a lot is that when you come back, you have to pay for being away. So the regiment is always, well, you've been away for the last 6 weeks, so I'm going to send you on this duty. I'm going to send you here. I'm going to send you there, because nobody else wants to go. Because it means getting on a train and driving to the north of Scotland or something. So I got to do hundreds and hundreds of things as a young and a medium officer that gave me a wide education that was unbelievable at the time. I mean, I have actually defended soldiers in the High Court in Great Britain because no one else wanted to do it, so I got sent. I managed the military prison. I've done hundreds of different exercises because someone had to go to be away for 2 weeks and sit in to be running exercise control. So I actually ran the umpire control for the biggest deployment exercise we ever did in Great Britain back in the 1977. So these were strange things that I was doing as a youngster because I was away running the rest of the time. This sort of thing sort of snowballed to the point where I became effectively known as a fixer, as someone who could actually do things at the drop of a hat. And that carried on through my career. And as I say, I ended up running the military prison, which needed fixing because it was corrupt and extremely expensive. And I was given the task of fixing it, saving 15% in the first year's running costs, or they were going to close it. So I had to quite rapidly at that stage, as a lieutenant colonel, learn about transformation, which I did. And I was fortunate, having done the joint staff course, which was effectively a defense management course, where we just did change management. That's all we did, and we looked at everything: police, prisons, all public services. We looked at every part of the military. We went to NATO. We looked at what NATO was doing in Italy, all sorts of things. So I got this really good background in my middle years of seeing how things work. Then I became. Then I heard I was not going to get promoted to colonel. Basically, I mean, they just said you're not good enough, which is okay. That's life. And I went to be defense attaché in Finland. And when I got there, I discovered that I was also defense attaché in Estonia. And Estonia at that stage was a brand new country. So I went across to Estonia and I saw that it was trying extremely hard, but the Ministry of Defence was just full of children. I mean, they were students doing their bachelor's degree in all sorts of places. And the planning department, run by my good friend Harry Lachstein, who's been an ambassador twice since, I might add. Harry basically said, "Look, can you help us? Because we're really in deep trouble." So I had a desk in the planning department in Estonia, and I also had a desk in the international relations department. Um, and when the students went away to do their exams and things like that, then I was sometimes the only person in the international relations department answering my own emails. So I'd write an email from Finland for where in the embassy to myself saying, "We need this." We need this. And then I'd reply, "It's a very good idea. Please, could we do this?" And then I'd write back to myself and do this. And thankfully, nobody in London ever worked it out, because I could have got in deep trouble if they had. But anyway, but that's so. So Estonia. Then I became defense. I went to Italy in between and worked and did a lot of work on air delivered intelligence in the Balkans, which again gave me another complete perspective of change because I one of the tasks I had was handing over the airspace, the Balkan airspace above Bosnia-Herzegovina, to the new government of Bosnia-Herzegovina. So I had to learn all about airspace management and things during my time in Italy. Then I came back and I was defense attaché in Latvia. And they then asked me to go and be defense attaché in Estonia again. So I then had two countries, both on the cusp of NATO membership. So I was working really, really hard in both. We also had Iraq. So I was actually working inside the defense ministry in Latvia, helping do the all the operations and training program for going to Iraq. So I got loads and loads and loads of experience doing this. And I left, as you do. You have to leave at some stage, and 37 years is enough for anybody. And I went to work in Estonia with the government for a year. When I finished that, I got offered a job back in Latvia, doing recruitment. So I did recruitment and headhunting, and we did also in this company, we also did some business transformation. So I got practice actually working inside different businesses of different types. The crash came, and I was going to pack up and go back to UK. And people asked me to stay in Latvia, so I stayed in Latvia. And nobody had any money when the crash came, 2009. The companies had no money. So I went pro bono for almost 2 years, year and a half. And I just walked around all the business offices, knocked on the door and said, "What are you doing?" And if they said, "Oh, everything's disastrous," then I offered to help for no money. I said, "Pay me if I help you, and don't pay me." So I worked with maybe 15 different companies, including recruitment, publishing, concrete flooring, and had a really good time, actually, learnt lots. And then Christmas 2009, I got a phone call from America asking me to go to Bulgaria to help them with change their Ministry of Defense. So I said no, but then they pestered me all over Christmas and New Year. So finally, in January, I went. And then I had then right up till till after the war in Ukraine, I was basically going to different countries, like 10 different countries, to work in the Ministry of Defense and the General Staffs, and to help them try and actually change things. And of course, most of them were Eastern European or Balkan, and they all had similar sort of problems with history and everything else. But so I learned a lot. What I didn't learn at the time, as well as I should have done, was that the main problem that I was fighting was actually Russia. I didn't realize until, or you might say, that probably the third year was a real total realization that actually the problems that I got were not problems with the country or with their budget or with anything else. It was Russian interference. And this became clear when some of the communist papers started getting opened up, and we started seeing names of people that were actually doing this. So I did that. Then the war came in Ukraine. I stayed in Ukraine. effectively lived there till COVID. And then I came back here to Riga, and now I just go backwards and forwards to Ukraine and work. And since 2014, my prime task has been Ukraine. Although I have done some work with other countries, but it's been minor compared to the 8 to 10 hours a day of you could say thinking about how to reform defense organizations in Ukraine and how best I can do that. I have to say I have not been anything like as effective as I would like to have been, but I'm still learning. I think that's about the best way of putting it. How's that for an introduction?
I think this is a great start, and we will get into why you think you haven't been as effective as you would like, and in Ukraine specifically. But I want to start with something a little bit more general first. And I want to ask you, as someone with this extremely broad range of experience, advising both companies and countries, what core principles remain constant across these radically different environments in the process of transformation?
Okay. I mean, there are several sort of, I'm going to say, conceptual groupings of thinking that you have to understand. I mean, the first one is with transformation, is that you either have incremental change, which case you update to stay as close to the red line of change as you can, maybe sometimes going over it underneath. You either stay there, or you have this, or you stay flat, and then you have to make this huge major change to catch up to the red line. And we are with most of, let's say, European countries, we're in that stage at the moment, is that they have to make this huge leap to go from miles below the red line to catch up to the red line because nobody's been doing incremental change. They've all been, we've had military groupthink about what's good, what's not bad. So now technology is pulling away. And the problem is that the line, the red line, is no longer sort of, a gradual line as it has been for the last maybe 50, 60 years. It's now climbing steeply. And so the countries, a lot of them are actually falling behind day by day. The change that they want to make is only going to take them 10, 15% of the way towards the red line because they've let themselves be so solid and stayed, especially defense ministries. I mean, defense ministries, most of them are dead. They're incapable. They are not fit for purpose in any way, shape, or form. They can't move fast enough. All their processes, all their thinking, all their people, in many cases, are just not fit for the battle as it is. Now, businesses are much better at this. Okay, every so often you get a major company realizes it's flatlining, and then they get a new CEO in and they make change and dramatic change. Ministries of Defense don't tend to do that because you get a politician coming in and and everybody tells him, oh, don't you worry, we know what we're doing, we're the experts, we'll help you. And so the politician doesn't dig in the way that politicians should do because defense is a bit of a black art as they see it, and secrets as well. Don't tell anybody. So, the political class don't tend to dig into the military in the same way that they would perhaps with health, where they've seen their mother in hospital, maybe they've been to hospital themselves. So they've got a little bit of an idea. They've been to the doctor recently. They've got some understanding. They don't have an understanding of defense. I mean, if you go around now, there are very few politicians worldwide who've got any combat experience. So that's that concept. Then when you're actually making the change, you've got effectively three levels. You've got top-down change. A top-down change is where you bring in someone who says, I know what I want to do, I know how I'm going to do it, and you are all going to do what I want you to do. Very, very, very resonant of business, where you pay millions for a really good CEO who knows how to do this. And many CEOs you get, and they only stay 3 or 4 years, cash out all their shares that they've got, and they've done this change. Then you get sort of the middle order business change, where you've got quite a lot of people who actually know what to do, but the boss has not actually let them. And then they get someone in who says, well, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Why don't we do that? Yes, let's do what you have just suggested. So you get this change round from people who've grown up maybe 15, 20 years in the company and know what is needed doing because they've been looking at it. They've been looking around at the world and they say, we need to do what the post office is doing. We need to do what Marks and Spencer's is doing or something like that.
Mhm.
That tends not to happen too much in the military for reasons I shall explain. And then you have bottom-up change. And bottom-up change is very, very close to incremental change, where you have people down at the bottom who are constantly producing good ideas and actually making changes as you go along. Now, when I was in the British Army, there was quite a bit of that, and we were actually encouraged to do so. And I will just give a couple of ideas. I mean, we had essay competitions, for example, where the officers had to write essays about how we would change this and how we would change that. We were actually, when I became a battery commander, which is it's a major, but relatively low level in the army for officers. When I became a major, my order from the artillery general was very simple. He called me into his office. He said, congratulations, you're going to be battery commander of 13 Martinique battery. He said, I've only got one thing for you: innovate. That's what he said, innovate. So I knew I had the artillery general's okay to innovate, and I did. So I could do bottom up from right down in the bottom, middle, bottom, and actually fix things, change things, and do things differently. Now, you've got those three levels. Now we jump towards Ukraine. Ukraine is still, its leadership, army leadership is still post-Soviet.
Mhm.
We are still top down, totally. You don't do anything without order. But the problem is that the post-Soviet generals and senior officers and senior officials are devoid of the understanding of how to do change. They are devoid of ideas of technology, because these are things they've never had. They've never been taught to do this. They've come through a career where you get promoted by loyalty. I remember once in Estonia, talking about soldiers and NCOs, non-commissioned officers, with the head of training in the Estonian Defence Forces. And he was making me despair. And I said to him, so what do you think makes a good NCO then? And he said, someone who does things quickly. Now, not one shred of self-thinking, not one shred of imagination. No, someone who does things quickly. Now, we've now got this problem in Ukraine, is that you've got this huge amount of civilians in the army now. Thousands, tens of thousands of them. In fact, hundreds of thousands of them now, of people who are in business, academia, farming, you name it, who are now in the army. But the strata above them is still post-Soviet. And if you don't do exactly what they say, you get sacked. And I mean that. You get removed, like straight away. So there is no imagination at the top allowing innovation to come through and allowing it's forcing its way in, because you've got people down the bottom who don't care what the general says. We're going to do it anyway, because if we don't do it, we're going to die. So they just ignore. So it's like, I think for the senior general, it's almost like Canute, wasn't it, trying to stop the waves? Back, back, back. The civilian army is rolling forward on under its own steam, doing its own thing, making change, technological change, improving drones, improving this, improving that. And this is all going on out of the Ministry of Defence, which is still solid and Soviet, and out of the senior military. So change is not taking place under a top level. In fact, in some ways, they're stopping things. For example, you can't use that because it hasn't been approved by the Ministry of Defense, even though, yeah, hey, it's really good and you need to use it tomorrow. So there we are. Now, how do I deal with that? Well, I gave up in just this. I gave up trying to make the system change. Because I was just banging my head against the wall, writing things, they don't read it. Why would they read it? So I just then, about 2 years ago, I realized that my energy was better spent just working on society and working on those members of the military who wanted support. So if they write to me and they say, Glenn, do you know anything about this? Then I work hard to find them information, to find them maybe a book. Sometimes it's as small as, can you find the maintenance handbook of a certain type of gun? Because we've got the new gun from international community, but they didn't give us the maintenance handbook. And in fact, we actually had one complete weapon system which came without the sights. So yeah. Oh, there's worse. There's worse. This is a minor one. So I got rung up and Glenn, do you know where we can find sites for something? And I think, oh no, I have no idea whatsoever. But at least you can do your best and try and find things. Spare parts is a huge thing for the Ukrainians to try and keep moving the army forward, because they just don't get enough spare parts for the intensity of the war that they've got. But they keep going. So there we are. Those are the two main concepts there, really. Is the one is incremental change, or nothing, bang, nothing, bang, which is where we are with Europe, or top down, which isn't happening, middle order, which is beginning to happen more and more and more in Ukraine, and bottom up, which is happening a huge amount, but is not happening in most European countries, because people are trying to control change out of the ministries of defense. But the ministries of defense are not fit for purpose in terms of actually trying to do change. So there's delays and everything's much slower and less realistic, you could say, because if you make change from, say, a Ministry of Defense, you still have to go through this hard period of soldiers adapting to a new change and making differences and realizing you can use the equipment in a different way or a better way than the industry tells you it could be used, or that the Ministry of Defense tells you. So it's much better to do things differently from the way that people are doing it at the moment.
You say in Ukraine a solution for the current issue would be to replace the older members of the officer class with the younger ones who've been more Western trained?
Yeah, I don't think it's anything to do with Western trained. I think it's to do with just intellect, brain power, imagination. I mean, lots of youngsters have got huge amounts of imagination, and the one problem is, and this is a problem that we're going to have to think about in many countries, is that our rank structure is extremely vertical at the moment, and yet we actually need much more. We need a much more horizontal way of working, because the intelligence is often lower down. Now, I would say in the British Army, we can get away with it because we've always been used to letting our soldiers and our sergeants, to a large degree, run things. So our leadership training is to select leaders, okay, to select people who can lead, and then educate them that you've got to let the sergeant get on with it. So we've got a different way of looking. When you join as a young officer, you understand that the sergeant knows 50 times more than you do, and that if you actually speak out of turn, he might just punch you. "Sir, you're stupid." And that happens. I can tell you it happened in my day, and it will always happen in a good army.
Mhm,
Um, but if you select all your officers for their academic performance, not their leadership, then you get people who think they know everything and
mhm,
who are less capable of opening their mind to the fact that the private soldier next to them is actually possibly more intelligent than they are, even though he may not be educated, but he could be more intelligent. I
mhm.
mean, one of my soldiers from when I worked in the nuclear regiment, and one of my soldiers is a five times author with one of his books actually in Hollywood at the moment being made into a film. So now you have to remember that these people exist in your army. So it's if you are of the top-down variety where you obey and the leader is the only one who's allowed to make the decision, you got real problems, and that's a real problem across lots of places at the moment, not just in Ukraine. So can you replace these top people? I think you have to. I think it's, I think that the decision has to be made to select people with sharpness and leadership from lower down. I mean, effectively, that's what Israel did when they started off. Is choose people who were clearly the best soldiers and said, get on with it, make the army and make it all work. And that is needed at the moment because the time taken for them to drift away and to move out is actually too long. It's too long. Too many people dying because they're not making the radical changes they need to in terms of command and control at the higher levels.
It's interesting because what you're saying is not at all what's being discussed by the US, for instance, or by others. They seem to be focused exclusively on weapons systems and this and that, but not on the actual structure. So this brings
Yeah.
me to a broader question, and that's also applicable to Ukraine, but also to other places. When advising state actors, when advising these militaries, how do you balance institutional reform and with the nuances of this political culture, identity, and historical legacy? In other words, how do you work in environments which are radically different from your experience and where you have these sorts of issues? I mean, I know you mentioned that sometimes you just have to get away from it, but that doesn't solve the problem. The
No,
changes still need to happen. So how do you walk around it or through it?
it's quite interesting. I mean, the first thing. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, when I started, I really didn't realize the depth of the problem, of how institutionalized in Soviet terms so many of these people were, and uh, and that they were incapable of actually breaking out of their mold to change the other mold. Not only that, but of course, in many cases, you go to a Ministry of Defense, and the minister and the deputy minister are in the same leadership position under the prime minister as everybody else is under them. So they won't do anything unless the prime minister agrees or the president agrees in some cases. And in Ukraine, here we have the president, of course, so people won't do things unless the president says it's okay. And of course, when you reach that sort of situation, it doesn't matter what you say, it's going to take so long that time has passed. It's just not going to happen. It took me a while to understand that, and my colleagues as well. It took us time to grasp that we were in this and that we were also fighting people who were working for Russia at the same time. Um, so that was a problem, and I mean we realized that you've got to go find people who really do want change. If that person is the chief of defense and he's got a bit of courage and he's got a minister who is willing to let him make or wants him to make change, such as let us say Montenegro before they joined NATO, where the environment at the top level was positive. So I used to sit in the chief of defence's office with schnapps and we used to talk through what needed to be done, and it was done. And the things that, the organizational restructuring that needed was done, and was done quickly. Because actually there's no difficulty. If you're just moving things around on paper, you actually can do things in 24 hours. And they did so. So that was positive. But there were lots of other countries where we might as well not have bothered going because nobody wanted to make any changes. And I did manage quite a lot of things in Bulgaria by just ignoring the leadership and finding the people who wanted to make change, such as the medical organization, and then just sitting down with them, redrawing what needed to be done, and then letting them get on with it in the understanding that they had their own budget, which was useful. So they didn't have to go to the central budget to ask for support. They had their own budget, and they had, because they're medics, medical people want to do the best that they can possibly do in most places because they're doctors, and doctors like to do things properly. Having said that, I didn't find that in Ukraine, but this is different. In Bulgaria, they did. So it was finding people and then sitting and talking to them and explaining how to do things differently, and helping them solve their problems. If you try and impose a problem on somebody, you understand it's broken. You're not going to go anywhere with them unless they say, this is broken, Glen, can you help? When you get that, then you can move very quickly. Unless their boss won't let them do it, which case then you're in this game of trying to persuade the boss, and you may only make one or two very small steps forward in 6 months or a year. Any steps are good steps, in my view. So it's got that whole thing is quite a challenge. So in most European countries, post-Soviet and post-Yugoslavian, you have to get at the president. You've got to get the president's office to agree. You've got to get his advisor to agree, as long as his advisor's not working for Russia, or even the president working for Russia, as we can see in Europe at the moment. We have that problem. You've got to get them to agree and get them to tell the chief of defense, this is a good thing. We need to make this. And some countries have been quite radical. Some countries have actually done things quite quickly when people have not moved. I think Albania sacked, is that Albania or Slovenia? Slovenia sacked chiefs of defense quickly if they didn't actually move fast enough. So you've got to find that opening. So I judge my visits, and I judge my effectiveness by how many people come back onto my LinkedIn after a visit, or LinkedIn or Facebook. And if they come back and say, when are you coming back again? Can you help me with this? Then I know that the door is open, and that there is a possibility of doing change. If nobody speaks to you afterwards, it wasn't worth it. That you're in an environment that is flatlined, and the world is moving and changing, but they're not going to. They'd rather have stability, this great word, stability, which means death in military terms, because it just means you're never going to catch up. And there are countries that will never catch up. Doesn't matter what they do, they will never catch up because they're physically incapable of moving fast enough. And of course, every year, if you waste, there's this one great rule for transformation, which is that you can only spend money once. So if you spend the budget money on something that is not needed, it's not there when you need it to spend on something new. So you've got countries that have been spending their budget money year on year on year on year on dead equipment, things that they can never take to war. But they don't want to change because we've got a tank and we'll keep it. Yeah, but that tank is so old that it's unusable. We'll modernize it. Yeah, but you can't modernize something that's so old that it's unusable. It's just modernizing a horse. sort of thing. It's just, and so they've wasted all that money. So that money is not there then to make the necessary changes. And I mean, I actually worked out that at the rate of change of one of the countries, it was going to take, just to transform the basic of what they already had, it was going to take 99 years of budget money. Yeah, look at me, 99 years. And mathematics, I showed the mathematics. I actually showed them how much that, and what they had to spend it on, and what 99, which means they can never catch up. So the only way is to rip the whole thing apart. Stop spending on everything that is rubbish. Get rid of it all. Take a risk for 3 or 4 or 5 years and just buy some cheap stuff to keep going, almost like motorcycles, bicycles and things, and save the money to buy new things. Otherwise, you're just giving this money away on a rotten old house, which is wooden house, 1920s, which is incapable of becoming a mansion. And so we've got countries in Europe that are at this stage, and they don't need Trump's 5%. They need more like 7 or 8% of GDP, or even more, to just become relatively functional. Yeah. And you can do it. You see, the thing is about, the thing about America is you've got the money to spend. That relatively, although you've got a big army of 1 million, in relative size to your population, it's a small army compared, for example, to Estonia, where you've only got 1 million people, but huge amounts of them are involved in the defense and security system and in the industry surrounding defense and security. So their contribution as a country is huge to NATO, compared to some others.
So that brings me to the next point. Supposing you do encounter either governments or corporate leadership, or somebody, a willing partner who's willing to make the changes, what frameworks or methodologies have proven most effective in executing transformation at scale, whether in a corporation or a sovereign state?
Well, I think that there has been no single methodology that works. That's the first thing, because the people that you're dealing with are different. So the person may be quite technologically capable that you're dealing with, but not necessarily a strong enough leader.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes that person will like transfer you to one of his colleagues, who's a much stronger person, and who then can take the blame if it goes wrong. So you have to use that great marketing expression. You have to wheel and deal in these things. I still think that if you can get if you can get the political opening at the top, and without the political opening, you're going nowhere. So if you don't have the backup, for example, if you're working somewhere, if you don't have the backup of the American embassy and the UK embassy and the German embassy for change, in the host country, then you're not going to go very far, because they're the first thing they're going to do. They're going to say, is this a good idea? So you can't actually go in and just look at the host country and say that we deal with them. You've actually got to have good relationships around those in some way, so that those other people will support you. If they don't want to support you, they'll undermine you straight away. And I give an example from one country I shall not name, who wanted to undermine myself and my colleagues because they thought we weren't going to support their defense sales of their country into the host country, because we were not from the same country. So there was a wheels within wheels here. And I was fortunate that actually the person that they actually sent to have discussions with us, from the country that wanted to do the defense sales, happened to be an old friend of mine. So we were able to have a relatively good conversation at dinner, where I just said, I'm not interested in what you sell them or who sells them. I'm only interested that they have, a working radar, working aeroplanes and working this, not radars that don't work, 100-year-old planes and a structure that's so big that you're wasting everybody on generals, not on this sort of thing. So when you get there, the first thing you have to find out is, can you get this political agreement? Now, if US is already supporting that, which they do or have done historically extremely well, very, very strongly and very powerfully, where you get, senior members of the United States administration coming in and saying, if you want help, we will help you. We will pay for people who know what they're doing to come and help you do this. Now, if you've got that, you've got the political buy-in, you hope. Not always. Sometimes they just say yes to the Americans, but they're not going to do anything anyway, which is an interesting observation. So it's just a bit of a lie, it's to keep US happy. We'll buy 4 Black Hawk helicopters from US. They will be happy and they'll go away. But we're not actually going to make any changes. How many times have I seen that? Far too many. Then the other thing that really is important about the whole thing is you have to understand scale. You have to understand the scale of the country that you're in, and therefore the size of the budget, what the budget is what the budget comprises now. What are they spending their money on? And that can be quite challenging because sometimes they don't want to tell you. If you're experienced, you don't need much telling because you can walk around, you can just look and see whether for example, going into one country, you go into what we call the gun park where the vehicles are, and you just look at the tires. And it's straight. Are the tires worn out or are they new? Are the vehicles relatively new? Are they clearly well maintained? Or are they not? You can look at the doors on the barracks, have they been painted recently? Or is the last time this door was painted was 10 years ago? So is there any maintenance on the buildings? So very quickly, if you can go around and look at the organization, if they let you, and they don't always, if they let you, then you can actually make a judgment quite quickly of the strength of the budget and where the money's actually being spent. Then you have to scale it to see how much can they afford. I mean, you can't take a country like Kosovo and start trying to create West Point in Kosovo because they only need, 8 officers a year. So you have to find a way, same in Montenegro, same with Northern Macedonia. They only need a few officers every year. So you have to find a scalable way of teaching the officers that does not involve extra administration, extra structures. So, for example, in Montenegro, what we said was, don't take any officers that haven't got a degree. So you don't have to go through the academic part of the officers at all. So you want 8 a year. You want effectively 4 boys for infantry. You want a doctor. You want an engineer. You want someone to do this. So actually go to the university and tell them, we want an engineer. Someone come and join us, and then put them in with the soldiers for the soldier training. Because if they do the soldier training, if they don't survive that, they're not going to be officers anyway. And if they're officers, they'll survive it and they'll learn how to deal with the soldiers, they'll make friends, and they will be great officers afterwards. But what was truly interesting and something I never thought of in Montenegro was that they discovered that the boys who were really, really good, who came in with degrees, were those from the sports academy. Because, of course, they were physical. So they'd already got the physical component. They'd been taught as teachers, so they already had the pedagogics of teaching, which they could then pass straight on to soldiers, and they were energetic, so they had dynamism. So they were recruiting heavily from the sports academy, wait until these guys had passed whatever it was they were doing, and then bring them in, and they were straight in and very good infantry officers very quickly. Now that takes imagination to do, to find things like that and to find ways of doing it. And that's, a key way of actually doing it. But again, you have to have political agreement. If the general and the minister all want a defense academy, or a PhD academy. Hey, PhD academy in a country where you only need one person with a PhD, not all the officers with PhDs, because it's just waste of time, waste of energy. If you only need one PhD, you don't want a PhD academy because you end up with more administration for that and eating more money than the cost to benefit for the actual structure, for the actual organization as a whole. So you have to look at these things quite carefully.
So that leads me to next question. How do you mentioned the incident where countries buy some things and then just to keep the US or whoever happy and then they don't actually do anything. There's another layer to that, which is what countries that go through symbolic changes versus real transformation. And in those cases, how do you tell the difference between these symbolic fake, fig leaf reforms and those that create an irreversible structural change and really transform the thinking?
Just ask that question again, Sharp. The last, I understand but how do you what? How do you
How do
see
you
that like that?
how do you figure out when when a country is going through a very symbolic fake change and when they're actually
Oh, it's quite
creating?
easy. It's
Mhm,
quite easy. I mean, first of all, I take a couple of countries. On one country, I went to the supposed sort of updated infantry battalion. First of all, they were right next to quite a good hill, like
mhm,
a 150-meter high hill. But approximately one-third of the soldiers were overweight. So they weren't running up and down the hill. They're infantry soldiers. They weren't running up and down the hill. Then we went to the battle fighting village, and it was overgrown. So the
mhm,
grass was all around the place. And now, if this was a true working infantry battalion, then the grass would have had loads of paths through it where people are training. They would have been running up and down the hill every day or every couple of days to make themselves fit. So
mhm,
if you're looking at an infantry battalion where people are overweight, it doesn't matter what they tell you, it doesn't matter what the commander tells you, they are symbolic. They're not real. So you can look at that again. Going to went to another country where we were shown that the vehicle park, and then we were also shown infantry training. And there was a girl was the platoon commander for the infantry training. And it was quite clear that this was symbolic because they were running around. They weren't using cover ground properly as you would do if
mhm,
you were being shot at. And they'd chosen a girl to make us feel that they were inclusive and they had women officers and everything else. And she was not a bad little leader, but she didn't really know what she was doing, and
mhm.
that became quite obvious. And when we were standing in the vehicle park, I still have some pictures somewhere. Um, I went to look at they've got 3 or 4 tank transporters, and all the tires on the tank transporters were totally worn out. So they were unusable. I mean, they'd have just slipped off the road if there'd been any mud or ice or anything on the road. So they hadn't bought new tires. Now it doesn't matter what someone tells you about we're modernizing and things like this. If those fundamental basics of how you do infantry training, of how you maintain your vehicles, of whether people are fit or not, or if those basics are not there, then it is just it's just Potemkin village. Basically,
Mhm.
it's not real. And you soon learn to recognize these things once you've seen it 5 or 6 times. Um, and then you see occasionally you get the wonderful shock when you go somewhere and you suddenly realize that you are in the presence of real professionals who know what they're doing. Um, and and it shows.
So before Ukraine, what was the most complex transformation environment you worked in, and how did it shape your current approach?
Oh, without without any question, Bulgaria,
Hmm.
because Bulgaria was heavily infiltrated by Russia. inside inside the defense system. And so there was a lot of what I would class as delay.
Hmm.
And that was one thing. And the second thing was they had absolutely no money. So you had to do transformation without money. And the third thing was, I would say when I was there, which was 2010, that in terms of system, they were already 20 years behind. What I will say is wonderful people, wonderful people, wonderful people that I worked with there. I mean, and I've still got loads of them on my Facebook, and I still have plenty of communication with them, and I still write things for people there, even now 15 years on. But if your system is totally broken, then it doesn't matter how good the people are, they can't do anything. I mean, the head of the joint forces was allowed at the time was allowed about on his own decision, 3-star general was allowed about 100 euros before he had to go for permission to spend any more. Think on that. You know, if you're in a business at that level, you would be talking, nobody would say anything if you spent 5 or 6 million. In Britain at that level, you know, someone would actually be looking at 1.5 billion. And here we had a guy who had 100 euros and then he had to go for permission.
Hmm.
And I actually found I actually found one wonderful senior officer in the corridor crying one day, in sheer total frustration. And we had it was a Friday evening, and I was just going home, and I just saw him, and then we literally stood round the corner so nobody could see us and talked for about an hour. And he wanted to resign. He wanted to go in and resign now. And I was saying to him, you know, if you resign and you understand it, who's going to do the next bit? Who's going to try and make it work after you? Will the next person? I don't think so, because we knew who the next couple were. So they won't do this. So it was in, you know, a terrible mess. And they're still struggling to try and actually get themselves back into the real world, because when you reach a certain point, it almost becomes impossible, as I said, without absolutely ruthless and dramatic change and rethinking. And of course, it's more difficult for Bulgaria because they once had a great army. I mean, during the not Soviet times, but during the period when they were working in the Warsaw Pact, at one stage, they were spending over 30% of their GDP on defense. Over 30%. And of course, that money has never come back. You can only spend money once. So, you know, they had where other countries had 5 of something, they had 100. And of course, as soon as the wall went down and everything broke, then all these things had to stop because there was no money for them anymore. The problem was they were never ruthless enough. So they were always running the defense. They were always saying, oh, we're having to cut, we're having to cut, we're having to cut. But they never cut ruthlessly enough. So the gangrene was so bad, they refused to cut it out. And so it kept spreading because there was never enough money. So they had a defense force that was probably, when I got there, was probably 3 to 4 times larger than they could afford. And there are certain rules for these things. I mean, there are rules, one of which is that effectively you can only have one battalion-sized structure for every 1,000,000 people that you have. Why is that? Well, it's just one of those little things you learn. So if you've got a 5 million people in your country and you've got 27 battalion structures or 26, it doesn't work, because you can never get enough people. You never get enough good people, because remember, not everybody wants to be a soldier. Finding officers to people a large structure is finding good officers, sorry, is very difficult. So in a small country like Estonia, Latvia, Slovenia, Slovakia, there are only a certain amount of people that are actually fitted to do this work. And not everybody is fitted to do it. They may have to in war, but in peacetime, it's not necessarily their calling, so to speak. So you've got to be quite careful, because if your structure's too large, then you have got holes all the time that you keep having to move people around into, or you end up double accounting. Someone can do two jobs, which doesn't work when you get under stress, when you go to war. And Bulgaria was too big, just too big. The structure was too big. They could never afford to buy things that they needed. They could never afford to replace things that they needed. And they refused to make, politically, because they'd been a great country army, they refused to make the ruthless cuts that they needed to. I would add that there are several other countries where that is the case. And another thing is that if you don't increase the amount of money that you give defense, if you recruit more people, the amount of money that you can spend on each soldier goes down mathematically. So it's a very, there are lots of graphs and everything. You can actually see how much America spends on each soldier, how much Britain spends on each soldier. And then you go down the bottom and see that some countries are spending not even a tenth of what an American soldier costs the system, or is spent on an American soldier.
Experience must have prepared you quite well for what you were dealing with Ukraine, which brings me to the question: how did the outbreak of full-scale war alter your original vision for Ukraine's transformation, and what had to be abandoned or reimagined as a result of the 2022 events?
I don't think anything changed my vision, because I knew it was going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
and told them so since 2014. So what they actually needed to do, and they did quite a few things. I mean, they grew much quicker than I expected, but at the time they didn't grow and equip. So that actually has caused problems, because you've got a lot of manpower, because this is a Soviet thing. It's people, not
Mm-hmm.
actually capability. So that has changed a lot of the things that I do, because I've then spent a lot of time trying to write about and make people understand that it's capability. It's not about people. You've actually got to train people properly. You've got to give them the right tools, and then you get value for money from the person. They are now 4.5 years into the war, just beginning to actually to grasp at most levels that they've got to handle people better. And in fact, going through Parliament last week and this week is the bill for human rights ombudsman in the armed forces, who happens to be a good friend of mine. And she's got a monstrous task, because they haven't adapted the leadership, and so the leadership is still harsh, and still, you do as I say sort of type of leadership, which doesn't work for civilians. And I knew that that was the case even before the big war, and I'd been fighting that before the big war, but as they grew in size, and they put lots of people in who were not, lots of people into command positions who were not really good enough for it, the problem got bigger. So that was one thing. I mean, I did not anticipate the sheer technological change of drones. I mean, I was in a drone company in 1980. So I should have known, I should have known a bit better, actually. Um, but of course, I was still thinking in drones for surveillance primarily, not necessarily drones as attack weapons, which the boys did, and and everything else pretty much is, I'm going to say, is standard. I mean, most of the things that look at, that you can go back to the First World War and the Second World War, and the lessons are exactly the same. If you're going to camouflage yourself, you have to do it properly. It's got to be for night and day. You've got to teach people the drills and skills properly before they go to the front line. Not have half of them die and then the others learn because their friends have died. Um, and so there's a whole host of things that I knew about, but because of the way the war unfolded, I hadn't actually you could say, prepared myself for writing. I prepared myself for actually helping people in those areas. So today I've been reading the new Doctrine Handbook, which has taken 4.5 years to write. And that's not any of the books, the drill books or the anything else, just the basic how to write doctrine. And that's so they've actually produced that now 4 years. And I was reading it and commenting this morning. Now, I wasn't prepared for that. I would have thought that they would have attacked a book so fundamental straight away, but they didn't because they were still stuck in post-Soviet thinking. And I did not. If you'd have asked me, will the war change things? I would have thought much, much, much quicker. I could
Mm.
not imagine that a war would still take 4.5 years to even some of the most basic things being changed. It's almost beyond my. It was almost beyond my comprehension that it would take them so long to understand this. But that's if I'd thought about it hard enough and how heavy the dead hand of post-Soviet leadership was on the country, even when the war started. If I'd thought about it hard enough, I would have realized it would still take 4.5 years, 4 years to do this. But I was living in hope. You always live in hope with these things. You hope that things will happen and it will force change, but it didn't. It actually forced a lot of people backwards because they actually went backwards because they were frightened of making a decision because they had no experience in this, no experience of how to do, and no, you see, no staff training, no staff course like we have in Britain and America, where you're taught how to do things. They don't have that. They were on courses to learn things, but usually you could say facts and figures. This is how a structure of this is. Not this is how you change the structure to something else, but this is how it is. So they learnt the past on their courses. They're learning the past. They're learning what exists. They're not learning how to change it into the modern world because they don't have these courses. So if I'd thought hard enough at that stage, I'd have realized that the most important thing was to get Britain and America to run staff courses for the officers. And if we'd done that in the first, if we'd done that between 2014 and 2019, 2020, instead of training soldiers, we should have been training officers.
Mm.
But I'm not sure we would have had the political agreement to do that.
Right.
Because politics and officers is very precious because they don't want people to disobey or to get thinking above their station.
Mm-hmm.
So the president doesn't like people thinking too much because then they become dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the trouble. We always had a trouble all the time, all the way from 2014 of teaching special forces, because special forces have always been considered a political threat to the power. So America was training special forces, and then everything was being dissipated and ruined, and the commanders were being changed, and non-special forces commanders put in charge to keep them under control, to keep political control of them. So what America thought was a natural thing to do in Pentagon, train their special forces, then they can go and do this. But no, they weren't used for what we were training them for because of the political threat. So, how do you think of things like this in advance? You can't. You can only react to it when it happens and say, oh, I didn't think of that. And I tell you, there's lots of that. Lots of that. And for me, it's like every couple of days still.
So, what do they say were the biggest institutional bottlenecks in the governance and this defense structures you had to overcome? I mean, I understand a lot about this inertia and about this threat. Was there anything else you can think of that was a major obstacle?
Well, I mean, in Ukraine at the moment, I mean, the main thing is that this almost maniacal control by the president's administration,
Mhm.
and that you can't do anything if the president doesn't say so. And I mean, they're appointing far too many people and not letting the system let the best ones rise to the top. So
Mhm.
this is a real problem, and this is only just really being understood now by other countries of how much this depth of control actually stops change.
Mhm.
Doesn't if you don't actually, I mean, a prime example now is that the army commander resigned recently, Tripathi, because he couldn't do his job. And why couldn't he do his job? Well, they made him army commander, and then they sent him to the front to command large parts of the battle. Well, you can't be army commander back in Kiev in your headquarters and make change if you're on the front line in wherever. So he had to resign from one of those jobs. But it took them ages to understand this because it's, this control thing. It should never have happened in the first place. So you've got the chief of defense is also on the front line fighting. He's not back. He comes back every now and again to do a bit of work in Kiev, but he's not got the intellectual time required to change the system, to look at the system and to change it. So because he's on the front line, he's worrying about the war, the fighting, and those things are institutional problems, because if the president's administration doesn't realize that there is an institutional problem, they don't change it. So the institutional problem continues. And that has been the case a lot of the time, is that people don't, they needed to change training, but the army commander doesn't really feel he's got the authority to do it. He has to go to the general staff, and the general staff don't really understand it because they're busy fighting the war. So you get this just massive delays in things where you're doing things, for example, looking at army training, which I was a few weeks ago, and actually in one of the training areas, and myself and the new human rights ombudsman went to look at this, and two members of the general staff came with us, but nobody from the army. But it's an army activity. So you've got the general staff who are fighting the war and trying to control every little bit of military life. So you've got two guys away for a day from their desk doing something that should have been done by the army headquarters. But the army headquarters don't do it because the general staff says it's their job. Now, these institutional things require a manager who understands how to manage. Frankly, instead of having a military chief of staff managing the general staff, they need a businessman or business lady, someone who's actually managed a large organization, who understands how management and organizational theory and has been trained to do this. But when you've not had a staff training, then you run things by endless meetings, which means that nobody has any time for doing any work because they're in endless meetings, going from meeting to meeting to meeting, making no decisions because nobody's allowed to make a decision. Nobody's been taught how to write, so people still write academically. In other words,
Mhm.
3 times as much as they need to.
Mhm.
They can't write sharp. Uh, so, so these are circular problems, and they need ripping apart because this is a country that requires top-down change. But if the president's administration don't understand what is required, then the only way is for society to beat them into making the change through Facebook, through complaints, through walking around with flags or whatever you want to do, to get people to understand that this does not work, this must be changed. And that's been quite a hard thing, which is why, as I said near the beginning, that I've spent more of my time trying to educate society, people who are interested in supporting, often because they've got husbands, wives, sons fighting on the front line, and don't wish that, and hear bad stories and don't wish that to continue,
Sure.
um, for obvious reasons.
But where does this obsession with control and the presidential administration come from? Why is it the case? You would think that there's a lot of younger people
Uh,
there.
well, the general thought is that it's about control of money rather than actually. So you control the people to control the money flow,
Mm.
because there's huge amounts of money in defense. And
Mm-hmm.
so you control people by allowing them, and this is post Russia. This is, Soviet Union way of working.
Mm-hmm.
that you control people by allowing them a slice of the pie, and
Mm-hmm.
then they give you back their 10%. So, so you're only going to get hit for corruption if you forget to pay your 10%
Mm-hmm.
or 30% or 50% of your slice of the pie. And I mean, even this week, one of the deputy prime ministers has been, is under suspicion, and police have sort of raided him and found lots of things that he hasn't actually told anybody he's got. Um, and but the president's administration haven't removed him. And there are sort of, there are some people who've been as corrupt as it is possible to be, and then they have been or useless as well, and then they've been shipped off to be ambassadors somewhere to keep them out of the way and to keep them quiet.
Mm-hmm.
So this is post-Soviet, and it's not Ukraine in general. This is
Mm-hmm.
a thin strata at the top of Ukraine that is still acting in this way. Unfortunately, it includes senior police, senior border guard, senior military, senior National Guard, half of most of Parliament,
Mm-hmm.
half of Parliament, let's just say half of Parliament, who are all in that strata,
Mm-hmm.
and who for whom control is everything. So even Parliament writes the laws for control, not and unfortunately, then when they delegate, let's say delegating down to cities, then some of the city mayors are in the same boat. They have their own little thing. They take the money and they do things. Um, and it is a natural consequence of being post-Soviet. It's not. Trust me, Estonia, which is the reverse, is a rare country. And that's because they've got the Finnish attitude of doing things right. But there are lots of other countries where they've also had the same problems, and it takes time. I remember talking to in 2009, I can remember it, the date of talking to Artis Pabriks, who is one of the leading politicians in Latvia, and he was talking about it, and we both agreed that it's a consequence of what's gone on before, and you go up and you go down. And then gradually, with the help of the European Union, you get rid of all these corrupt things, and you create rules and laws that make it and banking compliance. And thank God, the American Treasury, that you gradually weed these things out and weed the people out of the system. And it worries me a bit at the moment that if America eases back and becomes America first and doesn't put its fingers into these things, that some of these countries will take longer to get out. You cannot underestimate the power of the American banking system on removing corruption and removing bad things in countries. They've historically done a remarkable job, and also State Department as well, in terms of people trafficking, anti-corruption, money laundering, wonderful jobs in the past. So I am really, really worried about change management if those organizations pull back from what
Mm-hmm.
they've been doing, because they've been world class, and it's needed for Europe. Europe still needs it.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that particular issue has been well presented to the American public at all. Probably because many people who talk about America first don't really actually understand this process. If you look at who the people are who are talking the most about it, they're the people with the least involvement in the sort of processes that we're just now describing. So they don't have exposure to the fact that the banking system has a transformative effect and actually makes it better for everyone, including the United
Yeah.
States. I
Yes.
I think they only just think about it as a money waste on humanitarian projects
Yeah.
in corrupt countries. They don't understand that it actually can change the corruption and make it less.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I agree with you. Um, so anyway, that's what I've been doing, and I keep going. I've got, I've got a whole list of things that I have to do. The number of things to do with drones and drone companies and finding finance, it grows. I'm going to say daily. I mean, I am actually being approached now literally every single day by someone involved in the drones from Ukraine or supporting Ukraine, and about, how do we get finance, and how do we actually move into a wider system?
So my question is, obviously, there are some areas where there is natural innovation, like the drone system, but then there are other areas, as you've mentioned, where there's a lot of ossification and mindset that's really needs to be disrupted. So how do you actually diagnose the failing systems and the failing organ or underperforming institutions, particularly in war zones?
Oh, I think I mean, it's quite easy, because you just talk to people, and you ask that, are you getting your food? Are you getting your
Mhm.
ammunition? Are you getting your drones? Um, and uh, and that's from that you hear very quickly whether the system itself is actually providing what is needed. And if the boys on the front line are saying, we've not got anything, then the system is not working. It's
Mhm.
pretty, and I mean, obviously you don't take an answer just from one person. I mean, in my case,
Sure.
I like to ask quite a few people, but there's quite a lot on Facebook.
Mhm.
So on a day on Facebook, you can maybe read from three or four people, in different parts of the front line, behind the front line, wives of people who are on the front line, who are begging for money because their husband, who's a drone pilot, hasn't seen a drone for a month or something like this. So you just have to put those things together and draw conclusions from them, of what's working and what's not working. And I would not like to say that everything is not working, because there's lots and lots of change taking place in small areas, but often it's not as effective as it needs to be. Again, either because of control, or because the money flow isn't right. Um, because this is, when you're going, as I said, when you've been static and then you're going this huge jump, to try and catch a red line of change that is climbing away from you, you actually can make change and it still doesn't work. It's still not good enough. It's still not there. So you've got to make another one. You've got to make another, either lots more incremental changes, improve what you've just done, or you've got to make another big jump. And that means you've got to have people who understand that you've got to make a big jump. And sometimes that understanding has to be followed by considerable software writing, um, or by accepting, accepting ideas from people that are junior to you, that are lower down, that people don't like, because not everybody who's really good at this stuff is liked. Because you don't, when you're doing reform, and especially those inside who speak out, so younger officers who speak out are often punished. They're not lauded and said, "Hey, great idea! Come on, let's go do this." On the contrary, they're punished and removed. And I actually talking to one who came on my Facebook, uh, 2 days ago, who was punished and is now serving as a corporal, or junior sergeant, as it is in Ukraine. He's now serving as a junior sergeant on the front line, whereas he was training to be an officer. But because he spoke out, he was punished, removed. So these things are not, it's not always good to be the bearer of good ideas, or the bearer of truth. Quite
How,
difficult.
how do you create a systematic acceptance of this flow of ideas? How do you make it? How do you break through this hierarchical culture that makes it difficult to implement anything?
Ah, well, I mean, the fact is that the culture has been there for in Eastern European countries. It's just been there for so long that it's now ingrained in the system. Um,
Hmm.
and you're not it's only a war really that's going to make the change to make people do it. I mean, I'm going to say in Britain, and probably US, we've had the the good fortune to be countries where there's less respect for the king, the no king in this place sort of project that you have running in America. And so it's much easier when you have a system like that for people of all levels to to actually to get ideas into the system and get them changed. But when you're a system where you have a king and where people want a king, and or they want a president, or they want someone to lead them, and the score out of 100 for that is, in cultural terms, is like 95%, then that's quite a challenge. I mean, culturally, on equality, we are in America is probably 30% out of out of the 100, 30 out of the 100, whereas want a king, whereas in America, in Ukraine, it's 95%. In Russia, it's 95%. And so it's really complex in those areas to make people understand the equality. You have to not act like that if you actually want things to work. And we're not there yet. Ukraine is not there yet. It's still got some hard battles to go through to get a better system.
So here's one that speaks to that a little bit. How do you build trust and momentum in institutions that were previously seen as corrupt, inefficient, or compromised?
It's a people problem. It's a people and honesty problem, and it's simply you can't build it in. You've either got to choose the right people and they do it. You can't come in from outside and do it. It doesn't work. I mean, okay, if you're the European Union, you can have sanctions and you can have rules that you impose upon people. Otherwise, you can't join the European Union. You can't join the banking system. You can't join the club, so to speak, and that's quite a powerful effect. But the bottom line for all these things is, if you haven't got the right people in there, if you don't choose the right people, you won't get the change.
It must be difficult identifying such right people given the current circumstances. But the one thing that I wonder if can be helpful is using metrics or indicators that can put some pressure point in. So, what kind of metrics or indicators do you rely and do you advise these countries like Ukraine, like post-Soviet space, to rely on to measure transformation success, particularly during wartime or in general?
No, because you can't get in to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You can only write about it. I mean,
Sure.
you can recommend it, you can write about it outside. But remember, in wartime, because of the secrecy and because of pride and because of other things, it's very, very difficult. So, I can write and I do write and I do say to people that, why is this taking 3 weeks when actually it's a 3-day problem? And you can only just keep saying things like that until until members of society start picking up the line and say, it shouldn't take us 3 weeks to do this. We could actually do it in 3 days. And then you hope that that catches. But you can't go in there and tell people that yourself, because you get laughed at, because they won't believe that it's possible. This is another problem, is not believing that something is possible, not believing that other people can do things that quickly. And I have many stories of this. When I first went to work in Estonia, and I was asked to write a paper about defense attaches. And so I went back to the office and wrote the paper, and a couple of hours later went and took it to the person who's asked me, who's head of the NATO department, and she said, "Oh, I was expecting you to take about a month." And I said, "Why?" It's not a difficult subject. It's here's the paper. I've just written it, and there's if you're not dealing with trained people, there's an inability to understand that people can do things quickly, who are trained. And I mean, you bring any civil servant out of the cabinet office in Great Britain and throw a problem at them, and in an hour and a half to 2 hours, you'll have a well-written piece of paper. Even if it's not full of detail and full of everything, it'll give you the shape of the thinking, because these people are civil servants trained to do that. If you don't have civil servants trained to do that, you can't have a Ministry of Defence that creates policy. They're just clerks. So you've got a Ministry of Defence with a minister and a few deputy ministers from wherever, and then lots of clerks, not trained people. So it's pointless giving them metrics because they're not trained to be able to make a metric work. You can't tell someone who doesn't know you could do this in 3 days. Please go away and do it in 3 days. Because if they don't even know how to start making the change, the fundamental change, they can't do it. It's beyond their capability of thinking.
It brings me to this debate in the West. There's a lot of also stagnation, and gridlock, polarization in Western, well-developed countries. And there's a lot of debate on Ukraine. On the one hand, there's obviously been areas of radical disruption. On the other hand, there are issues that you've described. What can the West learn from those experiences, and how can they learn when changes and transformations have been so uneven, and in very uneven in the sense that on the one hand some areas have been transformed very quickly, and on the other hand in many areas the change is glacially slow.
I think that the most important thing is that they understand how quickly change can happen, and that therefore the processes that you require to do things have got to actually measure up to the speed of change, and that it's pointless trying to do something that takes 3 years if in 3 years' time that thing is not needed anymore. And that we have to find different ways of working, whether it's buying equipment, selecting people, and I see some lights going on above, the old light bulb on people's heads. I actually see that there are some, and there have been some interesting discussions in the British Parliament recently. But I still don't believe that people have grasped the enormity of the change that is happening both in the battlefield, both in hybrid warfare, and in those two particularly, and then all the procedures and processes and ways of working that you actually need to do to make it work. I just think that those are missing still. And my worry is that this war will move on faster than people are actually understanding what they've got to do.
So that leads me to the final question, kind of the elephant in the room that I've been building up to all along. The debate on whether Ukraine can serve as a model for post-conflict transformation globally, and whether can it serve that role, why and why not? And if Ukraine is not that model, then who would be?
I don't think there is a model.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there is a model, and I don't think you won't get a model out of Ukraine because of the sheer diversity of problems that exist in Ukraine as compared to, say, Germany. I think that what's got to be looked at are the principles. What are we actually seeing, and then identifying those, call them lessons learnt or lessons identified, and then trying to actually to reshape how you do something to match it. Now, the problem with most is that our bureaucracies are not ready for much of this. Equally, our parliaments are not ready for this. We need changes in most European countries. They need serious changes in laws, serious changes in concepts. For example, here in Latvia, they've actually said, well, because of the problems with drones, the military are not allowed to train with their own drones. Yeah, but then they're not being given drones to train with. So there's a complete lack of grasp there at the bureaucratic level that we have to change the whole way of thinking about drones, about training, about selection of people, about organizational structures to fit what it is we've got to do in the future. And that you can't just expand and do this by doing what you've done before, buying more tanks. It's not going to work. That this is, Germany buying more tanks, Poland buying more tanks. It's the wrong answer. It's the
Mhm.
answer for 50 years ago.
Well, we've
Um,
seen the shortcomings of that in Ukraine as well. I'm surprised that
correct.
this still persists after
But That's
after all
that's
that.
be- that's because people have got their lives bound up in this sort of thing. They've got the structures, they've got the processes, and those processes come to the same conclusion that they did 10 years ago. They don't come to a new conclusion. So you have to change the data at the beginning. You can't start from a false premise and expect to come up with something new. You don't. You come up with a premise that's based upon what you had before, and you come up with that. And that takes imagination. It takes imagination. It takes courage. It takes the parliament to actually to say we've got to change 20 laws now, like now, not heading for 2030.
Mhm,
Because if you don't change the laws now, you can't make the training different. You can't
mhm.
change the structure. You need bigger training areas. And you don't just need bigger training areas, you need authority to do different things than we're doing at the moment. And so the people are not thinking of this because the structures, the processes, and the organizations that they've got, they're probably too frightened to rip them apart. They've served us well in the past, is a good line, but that doesn't mean they're going to serve us in the future. And you need people with imagination. And then you have to ask yourself, did our generals get there by showing imagination? Did our politicians get there by showing imagination, or did they get there by being a good party hack, by being a good politician, by being a good brigadier for somewhere? And these are hard questions, and these are cruel questions, and they apply equally to the American forces as they apply anywhere else. Um,
Through Europe recently, I sensed a huge disconnect between popular perception of these processes and what is actually being done. In other words, there's been a lot of understanding that the laws are keeping entrepreneurship and transformation down because they're
yeah.
too burdensome, that the leaders are not courageous, that they're not moving fast enough, that the bureaucrats keep repeating the same nonsense, and yet there's nothing that seems to be done because the only alternatives European voters have is between the same old bureaucrats who are doing that sort of thing and pro-Russian hacks like what we've seen in Romania and so forth, who are quote unquote disruptors, but in all the worst ways. So if there's no pathway to change through voting, what can an average person in Europe do to force their governments to take the decisions that are badly needed, but that once you get to the position of power, nobody is incentivized to do?
You can only write and shout. I
Mhm,
mean, write and shout and just keep writing and shouting until the
mhm,
numbers become sufficient that people actually say, okay, it's true, we've got to do this.
mhm.
And I'm sure there are lots of good people out there, but if they've not been trained in this, if they've not been talking about this for 20 odd years, because they've been concerned more with stability than they
Mhm.
have with radical change, they 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 don't they don't have that imagination to actually to make the necessarily have that imagination to make the change. You need people. I mean, Second World War, we were extremely lucky with Churchill that he was a man of imagination, and huge experience, and that when he saw something like the Special Air Service being suggested to him, he said yes, do it. When he heard about the bouncing bomb, he said yes, do it. Let's blow up the dams using a bouncing bomb. So change was a part of the system. So we've got to get back into that somehow. And that means, as I say, it means new laws. It means killing the bureaucracy that has served us well for 60 years, served us well, really, but now it needs to be ripped apart because it doesn't work anymore. It's the wrong bureaucracy. Too much paper, too many rules, too slow, processes too slow. And you need to bring in people, a lot more students, lot more students, master's degree students who've got tech backgrounds, and thinking and agile and aggressive in their working, and remove quite a lot of the people who are just good at their job, because they're no longer the right people for the business, sadly.
There's going to be institutional resistance to that because nobody
Yeah,
wants to lose their
well,
jobs. What are
no, of
these
course they will.
unemployed bureaucrats going to do? I mean,
Well, if they're any good, they will find a job working somewhere else. If they're not any good, they shouldn't have been there anyway.
Mhm,
But it doesn't mean being the wrong person at the wrong at the right time or whatever doesn't make you a bad person. It just
mhm,
means that you're not the right person that is needed for this particular time in our
mhm,
history,
mhm,
because it is the most dangerous time in our history. And
mhm.
if we don't change, we'll die.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for your incredibly valuable insights. And I think it's valuable for any person, whether they're in a position of change or whether they're just looking from outside and analyzing. I think it's important to understand the underlying principles and to understand how these things actually work and that it is possible to change them and what to look at when you are trying to do that. I think for most people, transformation seems to be an abstract concept which is almost too scary to contemplate. But once you start having these conversations, it becomes a little less mysterious and a little bit more practical and implementable.
I'm very human, very human. That's the big problem. It's very human, but yeah, and fun, and fun. Anyway, thank you for
Thank
all
you
your
so
questions.
Thank you so much. It was a great discussion. For everyone who's been watching us, we'll be back next week, Tuesday night at our normal time, 9 p.m. And thanks for everyone who tuned in for this great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye
great
bye
night.
then.
Mhm. Bye.
Thanks.